Hello, everyone. I am Stephen Drew, and it's Wednesday. It's Wednesday. I think it's Wednesday with a bank holiday. It is Wednesday, and it's 1 o'clock. And I'm joined here with a face that you might recognize. And this isn't the BBC, neither is this the University of Sheffield. Maybe one or two of the students might know this individual as well. But the gig is up, and I've got here the fantastic Satwinder Samra from University of Sheffield. How are you doing today, Satwinder?
I'm really good, Stephen. Thanks so much for inviting me and asking me to take part in this lunchtime chat. I'm really looking forward to having a conversation. And yeah, thanks again.
Awesome. Well, if there was an audience here, we'll pretend there was. We have the virtual round of applause. So appreciate you making a little bit of time out of your busy schedule. So just before we begin, as it's a live stream, anyone in the audience, if you've got a question for Satwinder at any point, you can drop a comment and I can bring it up on the screen. But for anyone that hasn't met Satwinder, he will introduce himself in just a second. And the topic of today is the importance of architecture practices and academia getting involved and collaborating together. So Satwinder, first of all, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I was born in Huddersfield in 1969 to migrant Punjabi parents. I came to Sheffield to study architecture, which was a wonderful kind of opportunity. I then subsequently worked for a number of practices like Urban Splash, working on warehouses and refurbishment projects across the Northwest. I worked for Procter Matthews. Then I came back to Sheffield to teach, and I've been involved in the school for a number of years. And more recently, I run the collaborative practice course, which we'll talk about shortly.
Great.
And I also do some work on children's BBC, working on the Dengineers, which some people may have seen. And also I do some practice work with a very good friend of mine, William Matthews. So that's
Excellent.
been a nutshell. That was quite a brief overview. I skipped through that. I hope that was
That,
okay.
That was perfect. And I put a bit of eye candy for us in the background. I know it's like Inception, there's two Satwinders on TV, but as you can see here, it's a nice trailer, isn't it? That you've
Thank
done
you.
showing. I think it's nice because you see the university work and actually, yeah, we go. We got the Sheffield University, the famous lift as well, which is very interesting. But you're right. I am here partly I'm interested in what you do at Sheffield. Not so much the lift, even though the lift is cool and you know the architectural history about that. We'll talk about your collaboration with practice. So I'm going to pause this video here and I'm going to bring it back to us for a second. So you mentioned at the University of Sheffield, you set up a kind of a new course. And I was quite impressed with that because when I did my part one and part two, I had a little module of going into industry practice. And that was interesting. But tell us all about what you're doing at the University of Sheffield, first and foremost.
Sure. So around 2015, we realized with the introduction of the higher fee that we were concerned that quite a few students might drop out during their year out because they might
Yeah.
have realized that it's quite expensive architectural education. It takes quite a
Yeah.
long time. And so we thought, is there a way where we could sort of combine the world of practice with the world of academia and have a sort of way where students can earn as they learn, and also kind of capture some of the work that they do in practice. So we set up this new course called Collaborative Practice, and essentially it's an earn as you learn type model. And it
Okay.
means that students work in practice 4 days a week, and the fifth day is for academic learning and support. When we set up the course, we kind of had about 6 practices on board. Now we've got 50 practices on board. And
Oh,
I
wow.
think that the thing that's unique about the course is that the work that students do in practice becomes live academic content. So we're trying to join the two worlds up. But also we realize that students perhaps quite like working in practice. It's quite nice to have a salary, quite nice to have an income. And
Yeah.
is there a way that rather than having to leave that and go back to a sort of standard program, was there a way of kind of joining that up? So that's what we endeavored to do. When we set it up, it was kind of interesting because people were saying, well, students are going to miss out. They're not in uni enough, or maybe they might be behind. And what we've realized is that the experience allows students to reflect on what they do in practice, but also to become a little bit more knowing in terms of how they make design decisions, how do they balance their time, and how do they engage more fully in the practice world that they're involved in. Why is practice the way that it is? And in a sense, students are going from being passengers to being really actively engaged. And we found that the model really does work, and the reception we've had from students and also practices has been super encouraging.
Amazing. Well, let me tell you, Satwinder, when I did it when before the fees went up of Part 2 architecture, and I could barely afford that. So I was working part-time in Waitrose. Now, I did enjoy the Waitrose discount. However, I would have loved to have worked in an office like Aqua Lowry or Hawkins Brown and so forth. So tell us a little bit about some of the architecture practices which have kindly got on board with your scheme, because that sounds exciting.
Yeah, so when we set up the course, we reached out to practices that we already had a connection with, such as Hawkins Brown, Alford Holman and Morris,
Yeah,
BDP, Procter and Matthews, and because we needed their support when we were trying to
yeah,
navigate getting the course approved. So in 1 year, we got the course approved by our department, the faculty, the university, and we also got it approved by the RIBA and the ARB. And at the same time, we were recruiting. You can see on the video there's me back in 2015 kind of doing the pitch, trying to convince people that this was a valid route and that it kind of made sense. And we kind of had to be a little bit pioneering, and the students we were appealing to, we were kind of asking them to take a bit of a risk. And some people said, they're going to be guinea pigs, and we deliberately said, no, we're going to be pioneers.
yeah.
And it's interesting, only yesterday, one of the first students who embarked on the course, Chris Jones, who works at BDP, he was in the department yesterday doing some teaching, but we were just reminiscing about those very, very early years when we were trying to
Yeah.
do something that was different. Because essentially, architecture education hasn't really changed that much in the last 40 years. The length of course, the kinds of work that occurs. Obviously, there's a nuance in terms of the types of projects that occur and the people that might deliver those projects. But wholeheartedly, there hasn't been a big shift. And what we've done here is made the first year of the Part 2 very, very different, but also made it more affordable. And then students return to Sheffield and they join the standard program. So there's kind of variation and difference. And we think that that's been one of the unique kind of aspects of the course. And now, each year we bring on board new practices. You can see there on the screen, there are initial practices that we work with, but all the time we're looking to engage with new practices, but also have a broader reach. And
Nice.
in relationship to the course, it doesn't matter where students live or where they work. If they've got a place on the course, they can get to London maybe once every 6 weeks. They've got an internet connection and they can be in Sheffield maybe 4 or 6 days in the year. They can do the course. Because if students are moving around, it costs time and money. So we were kind of like, before COVID hit, we were kind of COVID proof when COVID didn't exist, because we were already doing this kind of blended kind of learning model. And it kind of worked before. So when we went into COVID, we kind of the segue into that felt quite natural, even though it was super challenging and super difficult. That we were all dealing with that situation.
Amazing. Well, there we go. We get another round of applause for being pioneers, because I love that. Maybe a bit too late for me now, but for the Part 1s, Part 2s out there thinking about it, you should definitely check it out. So there was 1 or 2 comments that have come in. So Joe Bacon, who's partners at Alison Morrison and Reba Cancer, says the Sheffield Collaborative Practice Scheme is so good and well run, well done. So there you go.
Wonderful.
That's nice hearing, not just the students' perspectives, but the architecture practices out there. And that's why actually, when you were speaking, I had a comment about that, Satwinder. Have you had any feedback from the architectural practices about the experience they've had going through this? Maybe there's a difference in how the student is compared to the traditional route when they come out. Have you heard any feedback from the employees by any chance?
Yeah, that's a great question. What we found is when practices have students who are already in the practice and the student likes working there, somehow they're kind of, would it be possible for the student to stay a bit longer? But they can't, because they've got to go back. So what this model does is it allows students to stay engaged. It's good for the practice because it means the student continues. Because we all know the first 3 or 4 months for a Part 1 are super challenging. Super difficult for the student because they're trying to get their bearings. The practice is trying to work out, have we hired the right person? How's this going to work? So there's a lot of risk involved. But after that kind of initial period, the student becomes more engaged and more sort of involved. And for the practice, that's good. And then suddenly for the student to leave is a kind of like, oh, I was just getting into this, getting into the flow. So that's a good thing. The other thing on the course is that we encourage students to ask good questions about why is practice the way that it is? Where does the work come from? Who makes decisions about the marketing of a practice? How much does it cost to have a desk in the office for a year? How much does it cost to practice? So conversations about money, about making design decisions. We also talk about, is the student an employee or is the student an ambassador, and what allows them to become the latter, and what collateral is given to them. So conversations around kind of, quite sophisticated conversations around business, the aspects of business, but coming from the perspective of a student learning in real time, being surrounded by other like-minded people. So we found that the students, when they finish the program, when they get into the second year, they're much more relaxed about time management, making good decisions, being good communicators. How do you tell a good story about a project? How do you listen actively with people working around you? So in our tutorials, we spend a lot of time thinking about that. And the feedback we've had from practices is that first of all, they're super happy that the students had a good experience. They like the fact that the student has returned. But then what we're finding now is that we've got students in practices where we've got alumni who did the course, who are kind of helping to mentor and support. So over time, the network becomes stronger and more positive and more productive. And now is a good time to do the course because it's been going for 7 years. But when we set up, it was like, right, what is this going to work? Will people sign up? There's challenges, isn't there? When you do something different, you do something new, there's always an element of doubt and uncertainty that will this work, and will people kind of buy in? And and I'm so grateful to be sat here now, surrounded by wonderful colleagues and the support of the people we've had within the department. I was joined by a new member of staff a couple of years ago, so we were expanding the program. Sam Brown, who I work with, who helps me lead the course. So we're in a good place, and we're already looking at expanding the program. And interestingly, a couple of years ago, we did develop a 2-year model, so students could spend both years in practice. And we went to the RIBA new courses group. We'd had the course approved internally, but at the time, the RIBA didn't feel like it could approve the program because they felt like there was too much time in practice. So perhaps, now's a moment for us to revisit that conversation with the RIBA. But I think change within the profession is absolutely fundamental, because for students, it's important that there's choice. And so students are able to navigate and work through and become the architect that they want to be, but without having extra debt, and for that to be a smooth, supportive process. And I think the current model has problems, as we've discussed, because it's too long, too arduous, and perhaps too expensive. And I have a real resonance with this in terms of my background. I came from a working class background. There wasn't much money floating around. So I do feel this kind of, I think it's super important that we acknowledge the cost and we try and have other models, but making sure that the new model's content or kind of excellence isn't reduced because it's a different way of delivering architectural education.
Yeah, well said. I completely agree. And especially having worked in recruitment and dealing with architecture practices, to me, when you're saying that maybe the initial critique of the course might have been too much exposure to professional practice, that is so counterintuitive to what I know, whereas architectural practices are dying out for people with more and more experience. And it's just such an advantageous quality for any architectural student who's going after their part 2 with yourself or whatnot, to go into an architectural practice and saying, I've not just done my part 1, I've been working in the practice for the last 2 years, because you pick up so much stuff even just being in the office, soaking it in like a sponge. So I do think that would, I would be quite surprised if that was still the same verdict now in 2022, especially when you see more and more emergent stuff following your lead. You know, like the architectural apprentice scheme is a different interpretation, but I love that it's got the same sentiment of getting people in practice and actually dealing with that, you know, that student debt, isn't it? If you're working, then it's not just about the experience you're learning, but it's dealing with a difficult economic climate and making it more accessible for everyone. Because you're right,
Absolutely.
I'm from humble backgrounds as well, and it's just like I couldn't afford to do things now. I'd be working in Waitrose full time, not part time. So I'd much rather do it with yourself. And while you were talking, though, we had one more comment coming in from Lindsay Richardson, which says, so good to see opportunities like this out there for students to really develop their needs and experience, which is so hard to get in such short time on placements. Thank you, Lindsay. That's great. Well, I think that's awesome. And so just while you're here, so I'm going to bring it up one more time before we kind of move on from the topic a little bit, but people can check it out in the link as well. But I'm quite keen to know. So you set up collaborative practice, but I know from all what you're saying and the feedback from the students, you're a good teacher. But then also, I mentioned that I'm going to be doing this podcast live stream with you today for my partner who is not in architecture, who did recognize you. So if anyone's kind of doing a double take, we got to address the elephant in the room, Satwinder. So I'm going to bring it up now because this initial video, which I put on, which we're going to do again, and I don't mean to, there we go. So this is your show reel, right? Which sounds very glamorous, you know. But tell us about, if you've got a show and people have seen you, my partner's seen you, how did you get into teaching and stuff through the BBC? Do you want to walk us through that part of your journey as well?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I feel very fortunate that I think it was about 2016. I got approached by the BBC and they were looking for architects and designers to be part of a show that they had just been going for one series at the time, which is called the Dengineers. So the Dengineers is a bit like Grand Designs for a younger demographic.
Right.
And they came across and interviewed me, but before they came over, I was like, I don't really want to do this on my own. I want to work with somebody else, and that's one of my big things. Always reach out to good people and work together if you've got an opportunity. So I reached out to a friend of mine, Tony Broomhead, who's an accomplished architect and educator in his own right. And I said, Tony, there's this opportunity. The BBC are interested in, us being involved somehow to design these dens. I don't know much about it, but what do you think? And he said, yeah, I'm up for that. So the producer came over, never done any sort of real work in television before. Me and Tony sat down at a table. We just had a chat about design. We were drawing and having a conversation, and they filmed us while we were doing it. So it felt a bit awkward and a bit odd, and I was a bit like, right, what does this mean? But we just had a go. We just did it. And then the next day, the producer rang up and said, we'd love you to do 3 episodes. We want you to be one of the designers on the Dengineer. So very, very quickly, we were sort of given briefs. So essentially, the premise of the program is children want to have a den made in their back garden. They're teamed up with a designer. We're given a brief, and then we come up with ideas. The den is then sort of partly prefabricated in a workshop beforehand. And then we spend 5 days on location building the den and then talking about the process of the design itself, but also some things like engineering or sort of physics, or there's a sort of educational aspect to it. And for me, it's been such a wonderful experience because working in television, you realize it's about using clear language. It's about being precise. It's about how do you communicate well with a broader audience. So it ties in really nicely to my other work, which is essentially about making architecture more accessible to a broader community. And working with younger children, you know, they're so switched on. They've got so many ideas. They've got no fear. They just want to go for it, and we're just helping them along the way. So we're now the show won a BAFTA last year. It's also won Royal Television Society Awards. We're now on our 6th series. We've designed dens which have got some crazy themes, wonderful themes, like we've done a cricket den, we've done a gingerbread house den, we've done a roller coaster den. So some of the themes are quite kind of out there, and you might say, well, that's not very architectural. But actually, what's wonderful is that we're engaging with a younger demographic, and we're engaging with ideas that people are kind of interested in. And I think some architects might think, oh, that's not very serious, or that's a bit too playful. But I think it's absolutely at the essence of engaging with a broader public, and not taking ourselves too seriously. And then on the back of that, I've been developing some ideas sort of for television, which are about how do we engage with a broader public, and how do we communicate well through the medium of, say, television, or even something like this. How do we tell a good story? How do we make people feel engaged and interested? And I found that experience from television has directly supported and been brought into my teaching and my practice work that I do with William Matthews, who was recently shortlisted for the Sterling Prize. So there's this lovely kind of correlation between the different aspects of my work, which essentially is around how do we make good design, but how do we encourage other people to be excited and interested in that without using big words like liminal space or shadow gaps or looking really serious or not smiling. I'm not sure where that comes from in architectural culture, but I think it's sometimes gets in the way of people sort of being themselves and enjoying the work that they're doing.
I'm inclined to agree with you that I remember displaced, non-placed, and all. It's interesting, but you're right. We've got to we should make it accessible in language as well. So fully understand that. And look, thanks for going through that. Now I've got you here for just under 10 minutes. So I've got 1 or 2 questions, but just to remind everyone out there, this is a really good chance for you to ask a quick question to Satwinder as well while we're live. So as you're a teacher, and I'm gonna ask for some productive little tips for the next 5 to 10 minutes now. So if you were a student, so me and you are going back in time. So if me and you are now thinking of, going into architecture university or looking at your course or anything, do you have any quick tips for them at the moment in the current climate when looking at courses?
So are these tips for finding work or tips for kind of working on your project at the moment?
So I think it's more working on your current projects at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's such a great question, because I was only talking about this yesterday with some of my students here in the masters. So I run a studio in the masters program, which is about intergenerational architecture, where we're trying to understand all the demographic that we're sort of designing for. And I think the moment we're in now, where students are bringing in, I call it bringing in the plane into land. Okay, we want to have a smooth landing as you work towards the final aspects of your project. And I think I often say, think about what it is, where it is, and how does it make you feel. When you're presenting your work, think about those 3 things. And then following on from that, in terms of the kinds of drawings that you might have or the kinds of communication that you might use, I would suggest always start off when you're presenting your work. If you're standing up, we're doing a review or a crate, say your name. Say hello, smile. Then tell us the name of the project and where it is in the world. So instantly you're communicating with your audience. There's no uncertainty about what this project is or where it might be. And then just tell a very, very simple story about why are you interested in this? Why should your audience be interested in this? What was the brief? What was the context? Tell us a little bit about the surroundings. Tell us about the site. And tell us about the process of how you've brought this design to life over the last 8, 12, 16 weeks, however much time you've had. And then tell us about the building or the spatial output. What does it feel like for someone to experience your architecture? And use key drawings, whether they're visuals or sketches, to kind of walk someone through that journey. So when someone arrives at your project, what does it feel like? How are they given clues about moving around? And then tell us at the end what you've learned and why this has been a really helpful exercise, and what you might do with this work as you move forward to the next stage. On my Instagram feed, there's tips about developing ideas or how do we communicate well. The other thing I think is just practice what you're actually going to say in that session. And if you say something, make sure there's an equivalent image on the screen or on the wall that you can point to.
Mm.
And try and connect with your audience on a human level. So talk about something that's kind of relevant to all of us, as in, how does it feel like when you drink a cup of tea in a really nice coffee shop? Or how does it feel like if you're sat in a garden and the sun's hitting the side of your face? Or how does it feel like if you've turned up late to a lecture or a talk and you're feeling a bit anxious about that,
Yeah.
and you're working your way through of arriving, and then you feel calm in the space. So use the idea of human emotion. So if you watch good television, you'll notice that it always taps into a human emotion, because that is a skill as a storyteller that as architects we should kind of tap into. Otherwise, the flip side is we just kind of go on this autopilot and we say, hi, my name's Fred, here's my project. We're mumbling, and
Right.
we're not
Looking at the
engaging with the
paper.
audience. And
Yeah.
looking at the paper.
It
Yeah,
drives me insane as well.
yeah.
This, so the last question, and you've actually made my role really easy here, because you've gone on to it, because I hear a lot, and I want to hear this thoughts of people going, how can you do a live stream? It seems so easy. But the truth is, I've messed up 100 times and I've been nervous, and it slowly builds up. But you've kind of gone the next level, you know, and going on TV. I mean, that's a scary thing. Like my mother is the TV, you know, the TV. She's less interested in the internet. Bless her. I love my mum to death, but it's a different medium, and some can say it's a bigger medium. So how do you build up that confidence to kind of speak in front of people? Because that does happen as well for students and stuff in architecture. Public speaking is important, so any tips would be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Another great question. I think you should try to be yourself. Okay,
Yeah,
you can't be anybody else, and people will often sense that in a room, won't they? If someone's kind of either putting on an act, unless of course they're an actor, they're paid to do that, that's their job.
yeah,
But you've got to be yourself. It helps if you kind of know your subject or your topic, not to be an expert, but at least have
yeah,
done a little bit of homework.
little
So
bit.
before our session today, we had a pre-meeting. I've looked
Yeah,
at some of your other videos. I kind of knew what to expect. So
right.
I think that's good. Know the space, whether it's sort of digital or physical. And then I think speaking slowly. It's very easy when we're stressed or anxious. We start speaking quicker and we just want it to be over. And, breathe. Everything's going to be fine, and just take it steady. And then just, again, try and connect on a human level,
Yeah,
and try and enjoy what you do. Use simple words, use simple language, and practice. If you practice speaking, and sometimes, like my work, some of the TV work, it is a bit awkward at times. It's like, well, there's a
yeah,
camera in my face, and I don't feel very relaxed. But then you just say to yourself, you know what? I think I can do this. I
yeah,
think I'm going to be all right. I think, you know what? And for students, I always say, look, you've worked really hard on this project. You've given a lot of time and effort. So just try and enjoy the process. And I think if you're more relaxed yourself, the people around you become more relaxed, and then you're more likely to find an opportunity or to spot something that otherwise wouldn't exist. Whereas if we're all uptight and we're all stressed and we're all like, oh my gosh, and people around you pick up on that vibe, and
that's
then
true.
you miss an opportunity. So it's like now we're in the groove now. It's just like we're having a nice chat because I'm trying
Yeah,
to be myself and I feel relaxed, and then it kind of, it's like a little domino effect, isn't it? So I think sort of breathing, tone of voice, speaking slowly, speaking calmly, smiling, looking like you're enjoying yourself rather than, oh my gosh, I don't want to be here looking at the floor. These are
stressing.
all, they're just
Yeah,
tactics. They're just tips that we practice using or practice adopting. But I think part of it is good prep, and part of it is being relaxed and knowing that if something does go wrong, it's not the end of the world, and there's always a way around that. But with experience, you just become more used to just sort of saying hello and smiling, asking people how they are. When you walk into a room, try and look like you're pleased to be there, because then that will rub off onto other people.
excellent. Well, perfect. While we were chatting, we had a few highs, we had a few hellos. I haven't got another question here, but that doesn't mean that if anyone who's watching this and goes, I wish I watched that, or maybe they watched the recap, I'm going to bring up your Instagram. So you are on LinkedIn. You are on, oh, that's me, big. Here we go. You are on Instagram. You are on LinkedIn. But you've mentioned as well, a good way people can reach out is getting in touch on Instagram. Is that right, Satwinder?
Absolutely. If anybody's, if something's resonated from what we've discussed today, you can always send me a DM on Insta. If there's something you want to know more about the course because you're interested, please just reach out, and I'd be very happy to make time for a conversation. Applications are up at the moment. We're actively looking for students who want to do something a little bit different, and I'd be very happy to chat to students who are interested. And also, if there's any practices who want to perhaps come on board, please reach out. But I think Instagram, I find it's a really lovely democratic tool because people are quite friendly on there. It's wonderful. You can say, look, I really love that drawing, and they go, yeah, thanks so much. And it's just a nice way of sharing, and having dialogue. And it's quite a friendly space, and obviously it's very visual. This idea that you can just do a quick sketch, or you find something you like and you share it, and you find other like-minded people, and you find other people you never would have found. So I'm very supportive of it as a tool, but I also suggest to my students that they use it as a productive tool to share work and find things that they're interested in. So, but yeah, absolutely, I'd be very happy for people to reach out. You can find me on the university website as well, or on Instagram. Drop me a message, and I'll be very, very happy to talk to people.
Perfect. Well, I've enjoyed this. I know, and I appreciate you making a bit of time because you're going to go back to teaching in a second. So thank you so much from the virtual audience. Anyone who wants to get in touch with Satwinder, please do so. And thank you so much. So Satwinder, stay on the stage for a second, just while I log off. Thank you, everyone who's tuning in. We will be back probably next Wednesday. I'll have a think of something to talk about. Otherwise, it'll just be little old me. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.